Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to our Lunch and Learn session today on ePrescribing. My name is Fane. I'll be presenting, I'm one of the presenters today. Very fortunate to have Kerry, Brian and Vandana from the Australia Digital Health Agency from the adoption team today with us. Just going to run through our agenda for the day and then I'll hand it over to the ADHA team to present, and I'll go through demonstrations. Now, just a few housekeeping. Next slide, housekeeping. So just remember, please, once you dial in, mute your microphone. Otherwise, I've got Christopher policing his if you haven't put yourself on mute and you're on mute, it'll be Christopher. Now on the right hand side of your screen, when you dial in, you've got the little panel as shown on the screen. There's a chat box down at the bottom. So if you have any questions as we go through our sessions today, please send it through. Now questions will be answered at the end of our webinar. So yeah, feel free to send them through as we go through our session. If you experience any audio issues, please just maybe disconnect and redial in. Use the app if you can. That's probably the best way to connect back and have a good connection there. Now, just very important, our future Lunch and Learn webinar sessions are on our website. The webinar today is recorded and we'll put it up online for you to watch and also share with your colleagues after. If you have any feedback, we will send out an evaluation form. Otherwise, you can email us on implementation@zedmed.com.au. Now, I'm going to hand over to Brian and Kerry now to start off. Now, the ADHA team will run through their presentation. I will then do a demonstration and then we'll do a Q&A at the end.
Many thanks, Fane. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kerry Doolan, and I'm joined by Brian Spooner, who will shortly present, and also by our colleague Vandana Chan-Nani, who will assist with answering questions. Together, we are provider adoption leads from the Australian Digital Health Agency. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of lands we're meeting on. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, who may be joining us today. We have warmly welcomed the opportunity to work together with Zedmed to assist you in understanding the current outlook for electronic prescriptions. Today, we intend to provide an overview of the roadmap for electronic prescriptions, explain electronic prescriptions' core features and benefits, and we will share an example case study. We will outline readiness requirements for electronic prescriptions, and Fane will demonstrate electronic prescriptions within Zedmed. Thank you. Next slide, please, Fane. The Department of Health and the Australian Digital Health Agency have collaborated to develop the technical components of electronic prescriptions, the conformance framework, and national change and adoption activities. Electronic prescriptions commenced in 2018, and since then, the technical framework has been successfully developed. The technical framework has been co-designed with key stakeholders through the agency's Electronic Prescriptions Technical Working Group, or TWG, as described on the slide up the top right there. Participants included the medical software industry, health professional peak bodies, consumers, and government. The technical framework details the requirements for software providers to make changes to their software products. This ensures software will be aligned with the electronic prescriptions legislative framework, which ensures adherence to privacy and security principles while maintaining patient choice. Change and adoption activities are also a significant piece of this work to ensure that prescribers, pharmacy, and also consumers are aware of how electronic prescriptions will work and what needs to be done in order to be prepared. Next slide, please, Fane. So what are electronic prescriptions? They will be an option for prescribers and their patients to use an electronic prescription as an alternative to a paper prescription. Previously, only a paper prescription signed by a prescriber had been the legal form by which medicines can be supplied. Changes to Commonwealth legislation commenced on the 31st of October 2019, recognising electronic prescription as an alternative legal form by which medicines can be supplied. States and territories are working on finalising details under this arrangement. Electronic prescriptions are not mandatory, so patients and prescribers will be able to choose between having a paper or an electronic prescription. Next slide, please, Fanny. Let's look at the two models of electronic prescriptions. They are tokens or the electronic script list. The focus of electronic prescriptions in the short term will be the token model. Active script list is the more complete solution and will be rolled out towards the end of 2020. Tokens are a unique QR barcode and are evidence of a prescription, not a legal document. As such, a token is the method of accessing the legal prescription electronically. The patient can choose to receive this token via SMS or email. Brian will soon go through some screenshots that will help you visualize the end-to-end process from generating to dispensing electronic prescriptions. Only one prescription is within each token. This model will be available very soon, as Fane will describe in Zedmed. The second option is the active script list. In this model, the consumer presents adequate personal identification. Then the pharmacy can retrieve prescription details for a patient from the consumer's active script list. This model will primarily overcome the issue of lost tokens, and it will be very suitable for those on multiple medicines. It will also assist with medicine management and adherence. The active script list model will also be useful when a consumer is not able to receive and send tokens with a pharmacy. For example, they might not have a mobile phone, computer, or internet. Next slide, thanks, Fane. This slide outlines everyone who can participate and use electronic prescriptions. We've touched on prescribers and dispensers, and just to clarify, both prescribers and pharmacy will require the electronic prescriptions capability configured within software to generate and dispense electronic prescriptions. Prescribers, dispensers, software providers, and consumers. Everyone has a role to play. Consumers are at the center of this and can choose to have an electronic prescription in an electronic form. They can elect to have a new prescription in an electronic prescription format. Just a couple of things to note: the consumer must have an IHI or an individual healthcare identifier to participate, and an existing paper prescription cannot be converted into an electronic prescription. Next slide, thanks, Fane. On the agency's electronic prescriptions website, we will be maintaining the software list, and as soon as newly conformance software becomes available, this reference will be updated. So please continue to refer to this list in the first instance. And we can see that Zedmed's on that list, and therefore Zedmed's firmly on there. But in terms of other colleagues that might be using other software types, this is the list to check. Just to note that because the software provider is listed on the web page as conformant, doesn't mean that all of the customers with that software product are enabled for electronic prescriptions. This list simply evidences that the software provider has passed the technical conformance requirements for electronic prescriptions. There is a link at the bottom of the slide to the ADHA website that holds this register. I'll now hand over to my colleague Brian to continue the presentation. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Kerry. Look, as a follow-on to various software providers becoming conformant with their offering, a number of communities of interest are being established. And this is designed to ensure a smooth rollout of the electronic prescriptions project across the country. Now, you may be aware, or indeed you may not be aware, that Australia's first electronic prescription in primary care was successfully generated, transmitted, and subsequently dispensed in Anglesea, Victoria on the 6th of May. So software providers are currently going through a product validation process, and the broader rollout of electronic prescription capability will take place as more and more providers progress through their conformance testing. There will be at least one general practice and at least one community pharmacy in a proximal location established as part of each community of interest. And over the month of June, we expect to establish approximately 10 or more around Australia. And of course, this is designed to ensure that any technical or workflow issues can be addressed on a small scale. Do note that the active script list model will be included in the Communities of Interest project from August of this year, and progressive deployment of electronic prescribing in a steady and managed approach is expected by September of this year. And you can see on the bottom of the slide, there is a link to the Communities of Interest webpage. Next slide, please, Fanny. So on this slide, I'm just going to share with you an electronic prescribing case study, which follows the story of a fictitious character called James. So James is a 72-year-old man who has got hypertension, along with an ongoing chronic condition, and he requires a supply of his regular medicine. Now, James's medical conditions and indeed his age make him very vulnerable to serious illness were he to contract COVID-19. However, to obtain a new supply, he must first make an appointment with his GP to obtain a new prescription. So James contacts the clinic to request an appointment with his GP, and the clinic advises James to consider a telehealth consultation with his doctor to avoid him coming into the clinic and risk being exposed to the virus. So James agrees, and he arranges a suitable time for his consult with the receptionist. At the time of his appointment, the doctor calls James over the phone. He reviews his current situation and discusses his prescription options with him. Now, the doctor then asks James if he is comfortable with receiving an electronic prescription, and James is reasonably comfortable using his smartphone and decides that he is indeed happy to be sent a token for his electronic prescription via an email. James then contacts his local pharmacy to ensure the pharmacy is able to dispense the electronic prescription and to check that they've got the medicine in stock. James then forwards the email with his electronic prescription token to the pharmacy. The pharmacy dispenses his prescription for him by accessing the token provided via their email and by following the instructions from their dispense software. James's carer then collects his prescription for him. Next slide, please, Fanny. Thank you. So on this slide, we've got a sample image of how an electronic prescription code may present on a patient's smartphone when sent by the doctor via the token model. You can see on the first image, we see the messages contained in a list of the patient's SMS messages. In the second, you see there's a notification that an electronic prescription has been received with an attached token in the form of a QR code. And in the third, you can see some specifics of the actual prescription received. And that includes the patient's initials, medicine name and strength, amoxicillin 500 milligram, the actual QR code itself, and some specifics of the QR code. Now, you can see on there, the actual medicine details will help both the patient and the dispensing pharmacist to differentiate between tokens if they've actually received multiple prescription tokens. It is worthwhile reminding you at this point that prescribers should really confirm that the patient has received the token via email or SMS before they end the consultation, or at least, ask the patient to contact you if they actually don't receive the token. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see an example of a workflow step at the pharmacy end. And again, this is just a sample image. So depending on the type of conformance software that the pharmacy is running, it will have its own individual look and functionality. But this slide basically replicates where a pharmacy staff member scans the token code to retrieve the patient's electronic prescription from the prescription delivery service. So depending on the circumstances, this step can be completed by scanning the code directly from a patient's smartphone, or alternatively, by scanning the code provided by the patient via the pharmacy email or SMS system, so whichever system they've actually set up. Actually, if you go back a slide, sorry, Fanny. I was just going to mention at this point, if, for example, the prescription had repeats on it, after that initial dispensing, the patient will then receive a new token sent to their device by the dispensing pharmacy, normally by the same method that it had actually been sent previously. So there is a little bit of flexibility there for pharmacies to decide whether they send it to the patient via SMS or via email. Thanks, Fanny. So what likely scenarios may actually occur for patients? Look, the agency, and indeed I'm sure Zedmed, has received lots of questions and inquiries around likely scenarios which actually may occur in real time. So the themes on here represent the most commonly asked questions effectively. So what happens if the patient is unable to receive an electronic prescription token because they don't have a smartphone? In this scenario, the patient can provide their carer's contact details to receive the token on their behalf, or they can continue to elect to receive a paper prescription. What happens if the token is not received by the patient? Again, it is recommended that the prescriber confirm that the patient, or indeed the carer, has actually received the token before you end the consultation. But do remember that prescribers can actually cancel an existing prescription and generate a new prescription and token code if necessary. How does the patient access prescription repeats? Again, we covered this already. A new prescription token for the repeat supply will be issued to the patient from the pharmacy that dispensed the initial prescription. And next slide. So these are some examples of the image or the display the patient will see if the prescription has expired in the first image, in the second, if the prescription has already been dispensed, and in the third, if the prescription has been cancelled by the prescriber. Now, do note that the QR code won't actually come up on the phone or on the device because it's no longer valid. So the device will simply display the relevant message. But again, depending on the prescription delivery service that has been used, the image may differ ever so slightly. And next slide. So on this slide, we've just got a readiness checklist for you to make sure that you're ready to partake in electronic prescriptions. And again, we will be providing all of you today with a copy of this slide deck so you can reference these retrospectively and indeed whenever you actually need it. So initially you can see, make sure that you've registered for a HPIO. Confirm with your software provider what documents you actually need to be able to access the HI service. Make sure you're connected to a prescription delivery service. Update your patients and indeed their carer's contact details, whether it's mobile phone number or indeed email. Understandably, make sure you stay up to date with relevant state and territory legislation. And very importantly, I think, is discuss some workflow ideas or suggestions for your organization or indeed with your staff, just to make sure that you're ready to go when you're actually enabled. You can actually see there is our last point there is a link to the Australian Digital Health Agency website. There's a lot of useful information on there for both prescribers and indeed for dispensers. But again, remember, this is going to be a progressive rollout. So, you know, your software provider is really, I suppose, your first point of call for prescription readiness. And next slide. Thank you. On this slide, you can see we've got a list of both Digital Health Agency resources as well as some of the resources that are available from the Department of Health and indeed some of the prescription delivery service providers, ERX and Medisecure. I will say that the Digital Health Agency website has got a lot of useful frequently asked questions, and we try and keep that as current as possible based on, webinars and information sessions that we run, and we're currently running quite a few each week. So we try and keep those as current and as relevant as possible. We will have some prescriber and dispenser e-learning modules, and I know that the Department of Health are currently working on some fact sheets for both prescribers and for dispensing pharmacists, which should be available very, very soon. And next slide. So once again, thank you so much for attending the session today, and I'll hand back to you, Fanny. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian and Kerry. So the next part, now at the end of our session, there will be remaining on the line for questions after. So I'll go through just demonstrating you how it works in Zedmed, and also cover the readiness checklist that they have. I've got a list of requirements for ePrescribing to work in Zedmed, so I'll go through it. On the line, I'll also have our head of operation, James Bevan, and our lead tester, Paul Cremon, so they will be able to answer any questions you have, so please send them through chat. And I do apologize, I'm going to be going back between slides and my Zedmed because I was having some technical issues earlier. So to start, I'm just going to go back to my slide, sorry. So these are the prerequisites. So in Zedmed, for ePrescribing, you must be on version 32 and above. And as mentioned by ADHA, your site must have HI service already set up and working. And if you have any questions, please contact us and we can discuss this with you. And this is to do with getting a NASH certificate. If you already have them, that's great. And also the doctors must be registered with ERX and MediSecure for electronic transfer of prescriptions. So our checklist, these are our checklists, and I'll send you the link via chat shortly where you can access our help page where you can get all these information from. So version 32, we must have a HPIO, that's your organization's HPI saved in Zedmed, and I'll take you through those. The doctor's HPII, the patient's IHI, and also look into how it's prescribed electronically in clinical. So I'll take you through that list. We were talking earlier about HPIO. So in Zedmed, if you want to check, now if you go into the management tab, the left-hand side, you've got practice setup and practice. So HPIO, it's loaded in the practice level, and that's here. So if I go search for HI, for example, and once your NASH is installed, this will allow Zedmed to locate your HPIO, and you can have that saved into your practice details. So that's the HPIO. In terms of a HPII, which is for the doctors, so that's under the treating doctor profile. So if I go into practice setup doctors and find treating doctors, I've got Dr. Davis setup. And as you can see here under the treating doctor details, you've got a field for HPII, and again, you can search that and save it. Now, the other thing also is, as a patient, the patient's IHI must be loaded. And I'll show you where you can find that in patient details. So when you open a patient on the left-hand side, initially it was there for My Health Record, so you've got this eHealth tab on the left. If you click onto that, if it's empty, you can simply search HI, it'll connect, and then it'll retrieve the information for you. It'll be then saved to the patient's file. So three things: HPIO, which is organization, the doctor's HPII, and the patient's IHI must be loaded. Now I'm going to go into clinical to demonstrate how it works. I'm just going to open up clinical. Now in clinical, once you upgrade to version 32, so once you upgrade to version 32, you need to enable electronic prescribing in clinical. So this can be found under Tool, Global Options. And if I go into the Drugs tab, you will see on the left-hand side who the doctors signed up or registered with for the prescription exchange service, whether it's ERA or MediSecure. And to the right-hand side of that, you've got electronic prescribing. So this tick box must be enabled for it to work. I'll just click OK. Now, how to prescribe electronically in Zedmed. So a doctor will always come into this screen. They start the encounter, then they go into the drugs module. Now in the drugs module, let's say we're going to go and look for a new drug. I'll go for the tablets and prescribe. Now this screen, it remains the same. Everything here remains the same. So I can just go, the doctor will then go put in the dosage. Nothing changed here. What they will notice at the bottom is that next to prescribe here, you've got prescribe electronically. So this will then take you to another screen, and I'll just bring it up here. So then this will open the ePrescribing window in Zedmed. So you've got the script details at the back. Now up the top, you've got the doctor details, the treating doctor details. You've got the patient details, script details, and then below I'll go through these options with you. So we've got clinical indications. This is optional. If a problem was entered in Zedmed, which is the diagnosis, it'll automatically load here. Otherwise, the doctor can free text. We've got minimum repeats intervals, and this is for New South Wales. It's a requirement that was put in there for New South Wales for Schedule 8 and Schedule 4 drugs. And you'll find more information on our release notes for version 32 regarding this. And this is to deal with repeats. Script owing. The next one down is a script is for emergency supply. This is when a doctor owes a pharmacy a script. If this option is enabled, it'll come up with the email field, and the doctor can email it to the pharmacy. So they need to get the pharmacy's email address. Alternatively, they can just print the token and fax it. But the email option is there. Now, in terms of sending the token to the patient, now the SMS and email details, they do populate from the patient's demographics. So whatever mobile number and email address has been entered there, it'll show up. The doctor can overwrite this if the patient wishes to send it to to another person, whether it's a daughter or a son. They can overwrite the phone number or the email address, and that phone number and email address will remain there for the duration of this consultation. So if they are to overwrite this with a new number and they prescribe another script, those numbers will remain. We also have, if the patient don't have SMS or email, access to SMS or email, they can simply select no electronic token and tick print paper token. This will then print out the token, will allow the printout of the token, and the patient can take it to the pharmacy. So that's the same token sending via SMS. It's just the QR code as mentioned earlier. So that's the new window that we have in Zedmed, and once the doctor finish entering those details, they click prescribe electronically down the bottom here, and while the patient is still in the room, they will receive the email and SMS straight away. And if for whatever reason there's a delay, they can always print out the paper token as the alternative in that case. Please note the email option and SMS are sent by MediSecure or ERX, depending who you're with. So if you don't have email set up in Zedmed or SMS enable in Zedmed, that's fine. And maybe later during the questions time, we can cover that. At the moment, it's sent out by MediSecure and ERX. In terms of cancelling a script, I'm just going to bring up my Zedmed again. To cancel a script, and on the left-hand side, there's under medications. If a script was to be cancelled, it's just simply right-click and cancel script on the script itself. A paper token can be reprint. In terms of resending a token, in Zedmed currently, and it might change in the future, currently in Zedmed we can only reprint the token. We cannot resend it electronically via SMS or email. So right click on the script, reprint token, and this is where also you can cancel the script. If it's a re-prescribe, doctor can just come and prescribe here. It'll give them an option whether to prescribe as normal or prescribe electronically. What you'll also see on the left-hand side, there's a new icon that comes up. So a normal script, you won't see an icon there, but this is the new icon for electronic prescribing. You will also have an X on it if it's been cancelled. And again, if they click on the link on their phone, it'll tell them that the script's been cancelled. Now, that's basically how you prescribe electronically in Zedmed. I've just got a screenshot of what it looks like on the patient's phone if it was to be sent by SMS. So they get a link, they click on it, the QR code is there. So the QR code is like the key to access for the pharmacy to access the script. And then we've got an email token sent out as well. And this is what it looks like in, if they're receiving my email. Now, that's the demonstrations in Zedmed. We'll jump into the questions now. And I'm just going to bring up the questions on my screen and we'll go through it. So Brian and Vandana and also Kerry, feel free to jump in also. And Paul and James, I have you both on the line, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello, Fanny.
Yeah, oh, good. Hello.
Yes, I'm here
Welcome.
as well. Hello.
Hi. Before I start, Vandana, do you have anything to add to our presentation before we jump into Q&A?
No, Fanny. Thanks. I think you've covered all of the key points. So happy to kick off the Q&A.
Awesome. Oh, good. James?
No, I'm happy to kick off the Q&A. Probably some closing remarks.
Okay, awesome. So first question, we have more than one branch using the same database. Each has a HBIO. Do they need both NASH certificate or just the main branch which already has so?
So different software behave in slightly different ways. So you guys might know the way that Zedmed operates, but often it's essentially done thing where it might be off the server, or there might be a system done to push it out to the various machines that are utilizing the HI service for any activity such as electronic prescriptions or My Health Record that might be associated with the HI service. So it's a good question for the Zedmed team in regards to how you usually handle NASH certificates.
Yeah. Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. And currently, the HBIO can be loaded under the practice details.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So it's going to use the practice HPIO. So if you have multiple branches, it should just use the practice HPIO.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
So all branches practices will need to utilise the NASH certificate.
Yeah, but they have a practice NASH, I believe. That belongs
that's
to the whole practice. So if they have multiple branches, that should be fine.
Yep.
Okay, the next one, how do patients select the specific brand of medication?
Thanks, Vanna. I'm happy to speak to that.
Yes.
Look, understandably, it's quite an important point when you've got very, brand specific or narrow therapeutic index medicines, so things like warfarin, lithium, etc. I think the functionality within Zedmed, I'm sure you guys could cover that, but I do know that there is active ingredient prescribing legislation, which will be, well, it's already in place, but there's a 12-month phasing in period from what I understand, and that will be commencing towards the end of September, if I recall. But perhaps Zedmed, can your team provide some information about electing and choosing the correct brand of medicine?
Well, it hasn't changed. Nothing's changed between the old way of prescribing a paper script and an electronic script. That part of the software has not changed at all. So when you search for a drug, it can show both the generic and the brands for that drug. And then it's up to the prescriber to choose which one they want.
Yes, so that, yeah, like Paul said, that hasn't changed at all. The way it currently display in Zedmed will remain as is, yeah, with this version. Will you be able to e-prescribe opioids? I believe so. If you can currently prescribe it, then you should be able to prescribe it electronically. So, yeah.
And if I can, sorry, Fanny, if I can just jump in there. So I think, with the functionality, yes, but just something for providers to be aware of is just the relevant states and territory legislation. You had an example earlier about the minimal interval repeats, just nuances across the states and territories. So just for providers to be aware of those as well.
Yes, thank you, Vandana.
Yeah, I could add something there as well. So specifically for New South Wales, the doctor actually has to re-authenticate, which basically means a pop-up box will come up asking for their password, their Zedmed login password again, and that's basically a state-based requirement that we've implemented.
Awesome, thank you. Next question, when emailing to patient or chemist, is the email encrypted?
I'm assuming that.
The email
it's
as
not,
such.
but it doesn't.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
No, you go on. You go.
Okay. The email doesn't contain any confidential or sensitive information anyway. All it's going to have is a link that will then take you to the page to view the token.
Yeah, so the email as such might not be encrypted, but the pathway for the QR code or the token is highly encrypted and highly secure, and utilizing things such as the PKI or NASH PKI process to travel. However, as mentioned, the actual code and the token in the email or the SMS doesn't contain any identifiable information about the individual that it's been aligned to requirements of the Privacy Act in that regard.
Thanks,
and
Kerry. And no, you go, Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it actually, a convenience point there for both patients and indeed for prescriber peace of mind as well, is that, for prescription repeats, the repeats will sit in that prescription delivery service safe and encrypted and secure until patients actually require them. So I think that's a really important functionality to outline, that convenience element and enabling that continuity of medicine access whenever the patient requires it.
And I was just going to add to that. So thanks, Brian, for that. So really, we talked about the token just being the evidence, but in fact, the entire prescription sits in your prescription delivery service, so your ERX or MediSecure. And that actually is encrypted. It's a cloud storage service. Those PDSs have been for, they've been around for over 10 years. So certainly have got all of the security aspects covered. So yeah, just to add to all of the points that everyone has raised. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. We've got more questions coming through. When do e-scripts expire once issued?
So my understanding is that's no different to how paper scripts currently work. So if a prescription was written today, depending on what it is, for example, the amoxicillin example, there is a 12-month expiry. So of course it'll be valid for that duration. But of course, if the prescription has been dispensed, then the token for that current prescription will be invalid if the patient was to present that particular token at another pharmacy.
Awesome, that's right. Yep. So next one, how can I find participating eScript chemist?
Thanks, Fanny. I'm happy to speak to that one. Look, there is no central register of pharmacies that are conformant or that are enabled for electronic prescriptions. I mean, it would be wonderful to have that. But the reality is that because the electronic prescription capability at the pharmacy end is going to be a progressive thing, the best thing practices and indeed prescribers can do is actually stay in close communication with your local pharmacies, because they will let you know pretty quickly when they are enabled, because they obviously want to make sure that that continuity of care is maintained. And I think it's reasonable to say there is that a commercial benefit for them and indeed for their patients to have that functionality. But again, it's a progressive thing. It will be very much dependent on the software that individual pharmacies are running, and it'll be a gradual phased process. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Are QR codes displayed on traditional scripts and e-scripts the same?
No,
I'm
they're
happy to
not the
answer that
same.
one.
Yep, go on.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was going to say the same thing. They're not the same. You cannot have a traditional paper script and an e-script for the same medicine at the same time. Like you can only either issue an electronic script or a traditional paper script. You can't have the same script for both.
Yep, and the actual barcodes are different. Thanks, Fanny.
Awesome. Next one, what if the SMS email or SMS or email is not received?
We encourage we encourage providers to check with the patient that they've received the token either before leaving the practice, or at least to notify the practice if they find that they have not received it. And as you mentioned, Fanny, that there's no resend option in Zedmed, so the options are to reprint the token and either fax, email, or give to hard copy to the patient, or to cancel and represcribe.
And
yes,
Kerry,
yeah,
something to add. I think it's reasonable to suggest that, look, this is probably a really good point to emphasize the training aspect, and perhaps as a standard, maybe moving forward, make sure that as patients come to your clinics that you've got the most up-to-date SMS number or indeed email for them. I think that'll hopefully reduce that likelihood actually happening.
That's right. That's very important. And to go with SMS and email as well, there's an option in Zedmed to print out a paper token if for some reason it doesn't go through. Yeah, but keeping the patient details up to date is very, very important. How do I enable Zedmed HRR? How do I enable Zedmed Healthcare Identifier Number? So in our, I'll send out a link in the chat after this. It'll contain a instructions for you can go online and yeah, we've got our knowledge base being updated with this once you have your NASH certificate. Do you have to be logged in as admin to look up HPIO, doctors HPII, and patients IHI? With access, I know patients IHI or staff members who are set up in Zedmed who can access Zedmed can do a patient's IHI. If you're unable to look up a practice or doctor's HPII, you might have to talk to the practice manager because it'll require additional permissions to be added to your role. Next question, how are repeat prescriptions processed? Do I need the original token?
Yes, look, in the initial instance, once a prescription token with repeats attached is generated and provided to the patient, when they present that token to the pharmacy, you know, that initial dispensing will occur. But for subsequent supplies, all the patient actually needs to do is bring the token that they receive after the initial dispensing to any other conformant or enabled pharmacy that can dispense electronic prescriptions. So it is important to note that this prescription token model is designed to make life a little bit more convenient and medicines more accessible for patients. So they do have that flexibility to move between pharmacies that can dispense electronic prescriptions. But just to recap, for the initial dispensing, yes, they need the original token. For any subsequent dispensings, they need to have the token that the dispensing pharmacy has already issued them. So for example, for supply number 2, the initial pharmacy would have sent them a token to obtain that supply.
Awesome, thank you. Will pharmacists advise their customers that they will be able to receive and dispense electronic prescriptions?
Yeah, absolutely. They certainly can, Fane. There will soon be a toolkit made available by the Digital Health Agency and also via some of our partners, such as the peak bodies. And this is not just for pharmacy, but also for prescribers. You'll be able to access this electronic prescriptions toolkit, which has some communications material to support letting patients know that you are offering electronic prescriptions. And absolutely, this is a key part of it, is making consumers aware that pharmacies are ready to dispense electronic prescriptions.
Awesome, thank you. Can the tokens be sent both Apple and Android devices? My understanding is yes. Paul,
That's
do you
my
have anything
understanding.
to add? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the tokens can certainly be received by any of those smart devices.
Yeah, it's a standard SMS message.
Great, thank you. Can doctors send directly to pharmacy?
As you described, Fane, it is possible to pop in a contact detail there, but the system's not designed as such for that. The system's designed for sending to the consumer, who then has choice about the pharmacy to dispense their medicine. The owing script process, well, if a script was owing and it goes up into the PDS, that will automatically update the pharmacy system once it goes up. And so if it's an owing script, the patient doesn't actually have to handle getting it over to the pharmacy. Yeah, so the goal with this is to share the token directly with the consumer, who then chooses which pharmacy to share their token with.
And Kerry, an add-on to that would be, moving forward and towards the end of this year, there is going to be the active scriptless model. So again, we don't know the full detail on that, but we do know it's going to be a more complete solution, sort of tailored for patients who may not have a high level of digital health literacy, or for patients who may not even have a device or smartphone. So that'll be a really useful solution for patients perhaps who are aged care facility residents, or patients where you feel they may not be able to manage a token, or indeed, look, it's important to remember that the paper prescription option will continue to be available.
Great, thank you. Next one, drug shopping. What happens if patients take the token to multiple pharmacies?
The beautiful thing about this system is that if the individual duplicated the QR code, once it's scanned and dispensed, that QR code is no longer available for dispensing elsewhere. If there's a repeat, the system will automatically find that repeat and automatically generate the repeat QR token to the patient via the SMS or email option that they'd previously had before. So the system's quite smart in controlling that. So yes, the QR code can be forwarded to a carer or a family member to pick up at a pharmacy, but once that QR code it can only ever be scanned and dispensed once.
Awesome, thank you. Next one, how long should the doctor save the token on patient file?
There is no obligation to save the token as such. Fanny, my understanding is that once the token, or indeed the prescription, has been generated, understandably for audit purposes and for database purposes, that will be stored somewhere in the practice's server. But I think perhaps who was the patient, or excuse me, the person asking the question might be concerned about the prescriptions by telehealth option, which is this interim measure that's currently happening, where doctors can send a clear image of a paper prescription to a pharmacy, and then of course in that case they are obliged to retain the initial copy of the script for 2 years. But yeah, certainly with a token, there is no obligation to physically store a copy of the token on file, but it will of course be stored, I'd imagine, in the database as an electronic copy.
Yes, that's correct. And I also like to mention the electronic script in Zedmed, you cannot delete at all. It'll stay in the patient's file, unlike the normal script. You cannot delete a drug. It's always going to be there in the patient's file. And yeah, next question is, each token sent via SMS an individual SMS per medication?
Yes, it is. It will just make it a little bit easier for people to receive one medicine per SMS rather than potentially having multiple medicines in one SMS and scanning one and not the others, for example. So that's why there's one medicine, one QR code per SMS or per email.
Good, thank you. We've got one more list to go through. Thinking this is for did ADHA say the consumer needed to have an IHI number? Would this be a problem?
That is the case. I think perhaps the suggestion is that not all patients attending the doctor's clinic actually have an IHR or indeed a Medicare card. I know my understanding is that with Medicare and indeed an IHI number, there is some facility for patients and overseas visitors, etc., to obtain one, but it's probably best just to link in with your local Department of Health. But certainly for the purposes of electronic prescriptions, you do need to have an IHI number.
And the IHI number is a source of reassurance, really, that the correct individual patient, the correct John Smith, has been linked with that that prescription and that record. Thanks, Vanilla.
Thank you. And I was just going to add to the point. So really, the question about wouldn't this be problematic? Majority of Australians, so we're talking about, Australians, those who have a Medicare profile, DVA, they've already got the IHI, so which means it will not be an issue. But as the team have just said, there is a small proportion. So those overseas visitors or international students do not have an IHI. So it's really that small proportion. But otherwise, majority would be able to participate and receive an electronic prescription.
Awesome, thank you. Would scripts issued by ePrescribing be uploaded to my health record?
So individuals or patients can choose not to have a My Health record and can choose to have an electronic prescription, and vice versa. They can choose to have a My Health record or not. So they're completely separate systems. Just because scripts are issued by electronic prescription doesn't mean it will go up to My Health record unless the practice is set up to upload that to the history of that to the My Health record. Bear in mind that medicine's history in My Health record it contains many sources of medicine's history, including prescriptions that are uploaded through practice software and uploaded through pharmacy software, and the medicines that have gone through the pharmaceutical benefit scheme that are part funded, they've got PBS funding associated with it. That will come through to the My Health record, but just because you're writing an electronic prescription doesn't mean it will necessarily go up to the My Health record unless it's been set up for that.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, our next question. Can Zedmed auto-populate patients' IHI automatically?
I'm not too sure, Fanny. That's one for you guys, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it's James jumping in. Yes, you can. You can set Zedmed up to do an overnight auto-populate of patient IHIs or do them manually.
Awesome. If I search a doctor's HPI number and it comes up with the error message WSE 0035, what do I do then? My understanding, this is you need to contact, the doctor will need to contact who sets up the HPII because they need to check something on their profile. So it's not a Zedmed thing. That error message relates to thank whoever provides the HPII to the doctor.
So that would be APRA, Fanny, just to clarify. You're right. So if there is an issue, that particular provider will need to contact APRA. And look, just a couple of ways in which they can do. There is a helpline, but they can also just log into their APRA profile and find out what may be going on.
Yeah. Good, thank you. Next question, what about authority prescriptions? Can these also be done electronically? Yes, the answer is yes. When you get to the script details screen, if it's an authority script, it'll take you to the window where you need to enter the approval code, or you need to contact the hotline to get the number. So that remains the same. Yeah, so it's really important to understand what you're doing when you're prescribing a script now. remains the same. This is just an additional window to that, which is just a different way for the patients to receive the script. Instead of a script, it's a token. Can you do an electronic script and print out one as well? When you prescribe
No.
electronic, yeah. Go, Paul. Sorry.
Well, the simple answer is no, unless you're talking about printing a token. But this was similar to the question earlier where, yeah, it's either electronic or it's paper. It can't be both.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. In terms of printing electronic script, it's just a token. You're printing out the token. Why can't the token be resent via SMS or email? Now this I mentioned when I went through my demonstration. So currently at the moment, we're only able to reprint the token and unable to resend via SMS or email, and this might change in the future. So yeah, who decides how the token will be delivered to the patient?
I think that's
it's a
really
question
down.
for the
Sorry, Kerry.
patient. No, you're right. Yeah, it's just a question for the patient there, Fane. So the patient decides how they, whether they prefer it on SMS or email. Some people are very, very comfortable with SMS. Some people are more comfortable with email. But yeah, but it's good to have, you know, both options available via this new electronic prescriptions model. And it means that, you know, the patient can either take their phone to a pharmacy to have it scanned or handle it remotely via SMS or email. So it's pretty flexible there in terms of application. But both options are there, and certainly it's an option for the patient.
Can I also add that you can also print a paper token as well as sending it by SMS or email if you want to.
Yes.
Right, so you can do both the print and send at the same time.
That's correct.
Yep, and just not SMS and email in one.
That
Just
is correct.
SMS. Yeah, SMS
Just
or
SMS
email plus
or
print,
email.
if so
Yes.
wish. Yep, cool.
Awesome, thank you. Next one, are there any government incentives available to promote ePrescribing? My understanding is no.
We recognise the wish for it, but you know, in terms of the context of a long history of you know, digital health practice-based payments. However, certainly for electronic prescriptions, it's not associated with that.
Yeah, and James, you should be able to answer this one. Well, will Zedmed version 32 be released?
Yeah, sure. So version 32's in the absolute final stages of being prepared for release. We're expecting it to be available in the next few days. It's currently in pilot at around, I think, 13 or 14 locations. So the short answer is in the next few days. Probably the more important answer is that while Zedmed will be out and ePrescribing will be available within it, it's going to be really important to be aware of what's going on in terms of the industry regarding rollout. So ePrescribing requires the prescribing software, the exchange, and the dispensing software, the pharmacy end, to all be ready. And we expect that it'll take some time for all pharmacies and all practices and even patient education to get to a point where you can really just assume that all stages of the chain are ready for ePrescribing. So what we'd recommend is that you open up dialogue with the pharmacies nearby to your practices and talk to them about their readiness for ePrescribing and when they're expecting their dispensing software to be ready, and then inform doctors and patients around that so that you're not caught in a situation where you're sending e-prescriptions to a patient and then they've got nowhere to take them to. So there's the ADHA has been working very hard at getting communications campaigns and so on together, and the general indicative date that we're sort of feeling about when there'll be a more broad base of industry readiness is around the start of July. But until then, if you do update to V32, just once again, just be really clear, make sure you're talking to the pharmacies nearby to you so you understand who's ePrescribing ready.
Awesome, thank you, James. A couple of more questions. What is the script is for emergency? Script is for emergency supply script owing field. This is for when a doctor owes the pharmacy a script. Then they can basically email it or print the token and fax it or email. Is there a cost to send by ERX for each token by SMS? My understanding, there's no cost currently.
Yeah, no cost currently. ERX and MediSecure, the SMS comes out from them. We're expecting this to be the case up until September. Not sure what's going to happen after that, but there'll certainly be communication that will identify the outcome there.
Yeah. Good, thank you. Last question, when cancelling a script with repeats, what happens with the repeats?
Fanny, I suppose initially, when in the initial provision of the token to the patient, if the doctor actually cancels that prescription and the associated, effectively the token with it, if the patient was to present or try and present that token to the pharmacy or a pharmacy that can dispense electronic prescriptions, you would have seen in the slide deck there was some sample images of what it would look like whereby the prescription had been cancelled. So it will look something like that, and as such the patient won't be able to access any supply at all.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's all the questions I have. We've sent out the link to our Confluence page via chat. You can get the link there. James, do you have anything to add before we finish up?
No, nothing else. Just want to thank the ADHA for joining us today. We really appreciate it and look forward to working further in the future.
Yeah, we would certainly like to do that. This has been a fantastic experience, a great opportunity for us, and we really do want to work like this in the future. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And before we close, thank you everyone for coming along, and also ADHA team, Paul and James. Now, just before we finish, I also like to mention that we've tested this in a few clinics that we've got, and it's been successful so far. So looking forward to rolling out version 32. And if you have any questions, please, flick us an email or contact our support team. We'll be happy, to answer any more questions from you. The video will be available tomorrow on our website if you wish to watch it again. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.